The morning sun cuts through the windows of Rosie's diner on 5th Street, but something's different today. Behind the counter, Chen moves like she's walking on broken glass. 6 months pregnant, she should be glowing. Instead, she's covering bruises with foundation that doesn't quite match her skin tone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At table 7 sits Marcus Steele Rodriguez, 52 years old, president of the Iron Wolves MC. Full beard streaked with silver, arms covered in ink that tell stories most people don't want to hear. He's been coming to Rosie's every Thursday for 3 years. Same booth, same order. Black coffee, wheat toast, scrambled eggs. But today, when Sarah refills his coffee, her sleeve rides up just enough. Marcus sees it fingerprint bruises, dark purple against pale skin. Sarah catches him. Looking, yanks her sleeve down, forces that practice smile. More coffee. Her voice shakes just slightly. Marcus nods, but his eyes have changed. Storm clouds gathering. Because Marcus Rodriguez has seen those bruises before. On his sister. On his mother. On women who trusted the wrong men and paid the price in blood and fear. Sarah hurries away, but something passes between them. Recognition. Understanding. A silent conversation that says more than words ever could. What happens next will prove that sometimes the scariest-looking people have the biggest hearts. And sometimes salvation comes wearing leather and riding steel. Before we dive deeper, drop your city and state in the comments. Let's see how far Sarah's story reaches today. Millfield is the kind of town where everyone knows your business before you do. Population 8,400. The kind of place where Friday night football matters and Sunday morning church attendance gets noticed. Rosie's Diner sits on Main Street like the town's beating heart, serving coffee and conversation to 3 generations of the same families. Sarah Chen came to Millfield 18 months ago. 24 years old, nursing degree from state, running from something she won't talk about. Took the job at Rosie's because it came with a small apartment upstairs. Cheap rent, cash tips, and most importantly, anonymity. Or so she thought. In a town like Millfield, strangers don't stay strange for long. Within a week, everyone knew the new girl's story. Or thought they did. Asian, probably Chinese, quiet, kept to herself, worked doubles when she could get them. Good with the regular customers. Remembered their orders, smiled when she was supposed to. What they didn't know was that Sarah Chen wasn't her real name. That the nursing degree was real, but useless now because she'd fled 3 states away from the hospital where she'd worked. That she'd been Sarah Thompson once, engaged to Dr. David Morrison, rising star in cardiac surgery, golden boy, with perfect credentials and a perfect mask. Perfect until the mask came off behind closed doors. Marcus Rodriguez hadn't always been a biker either. 20 years ago, he'd worn a different uniform. Army Ranger, 3 deployments, saw action in places the government preferred to forget. Came home to find his baby sister Elena in the hospital. Jaw wired shut, ribs cracked, left arm in a cast. Her boyfriend of 2 years had done it. Respectable guy, insurance salesman, coached youth soccer, went to church every Sunday. The kind of man parents trusted with their daughters. The kind who knew how to hit where it wouldn't show. Elena begged Marcus not to get involved. Said it would make things worse. Said Tony would change, would get help, would never do it again. The same lies women tell themselves when staying feels safer than leaving. Marcus had listened to his sister, respected her wishes. Stepped back. 6 months later, he buried her. That's when Marcus learned something that changed his life forever. Sometimes being a good man, following the rules, respecting boundaries, sometimes that gets people killed. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes being civilized is just another word for being useless. The Iron Wolves MC formed 6 months after Elena's funeral. Not as a gang, not as criminals, but as something the law couldn't be. Protectors who didn't wait for warrants. Brothers who showed up when the system wouldn't. Men and women who'd learned that sometimes you have to choose between being respectable and being right. For 3 years, Marcus had watched Sarah serve coffee and wondered about her story. The way she flinched at raised voices. The way she always parked where she could see the street. The way she worked extra shifts, like she was saving for something urgent. Running money, he'd seen it before. But he'd never seen bruises. Until today, Sarah's hands shook as she cleared table 4. Mrs. Patterson's usual breakfast rush was winding down in the diner. Had that mid-morning quiet that usually brought peace. But today, peace felt like the calm before a storm. 6 months pregnant, and David had found her. The text had come at 5 a.m., just 4 words that turned her blood to ice. Found you. Coming soon. She'd blocked 17 different numbers. Changed her phone twice. Dyed her hair from blonde to black. Moved from Seattle to Portland to Denver to here, the middle of nowhere, Colorado, where she thought she could disappear completely. But David Morrison was nothing if not persistent. Obsessive. The same qualities that made him a brilliant surgeon made him a terrifying stalker. Detail-oriented, methodical, patient. He'd probably been tracking her for months. Following credit cards, employment records, medical appointments. The pregnancy made everything worse. Harder to run, harder to hide, harder to start over again. And David knew about the baby. His baby. He'd made that clear in the text. Our child deserves better than a runaway whore. For a mother, Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective, shielding. 6 months along, and she could feel the baby moving, responding to her stress with kicks and turns that felt like tiny protests. Even unborn, her child could sense the fear. She had maybe hours before David arrived. Maybe less. He had resources, connections, private investigators who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. When you made $400,000 a year performing heart surgery, money bought you a lot of capabilities. The coffee pot slipped from her hands, hit the floor with a crash that made everyone in the diner look up. Sarah stood there, frozen, staring at the spreading puddle of coffee and broken ceramic, and something inside her finally broke. Not her spirit, her silence. Marcus was on his feet before conscious thought caught up. Something in the sound of that coffee pot hitting the floor. Something in the way Sarah just stood there, shoulders shaking, breath coming too fast. This wasn't clumsiness. This was a woman at the end of her rope. Hey! His voice was gentle, the tone he'd used with Elena when nightmares woke her up. It's just a coffee pot. No harm done. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time in 3 years, really looked. Saw past the leather and the tattoos and the beard. Saw the kindness in his eyes, the way he'd positioned himself between her and the rest of the diner, giving her a moment to collect herself. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I'm usually not this clumsy. You're not clumsy, Marcus said quietly. You're scared. The words hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Sarah's eyes darted toward the window, toward the street, always watching, always waiting for a black BMW to round the corner. Marcus followed her gaze, understood immediately. Someone was coming, someone she was afraid of, someone who'd put those bruises on her arms and that terror in her eyes. Without another word, Marcus knelt down, started cleaning up the broken coffee pot. Sarah knelt beside him, their hands working together to gather the pieces. And in that moment, kneeling on the diner floor surrounded by broken ceramic, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone, opened the photo gallery, found the pictures she'd taken 3 months ago. The one she'd never shown anyone, the one she'd kept as evidence in case she ever found the courage to use them. Her hands trembled as she scrolled to the worst one. The photo showed her back, taken in a bathroom mirror. Purple and black bruises covered her ribs, shoulder blades, the small of her back. Handprint bruises where David had grabbed her. Belt marks where he'd whipped her with his leather strap. The constellation of pain that mapped exactly what happened when a brilliant surgeon lost his temper and had access to a woman he considered property. Sarah's thumb hovered over the photo for 3 seconds that felt like hours. Then she tilted the phone toward Marcus, just enough for him to see. Marcus went completely still. The kind of stillness that comes before violence, before storms, before the world changes forever. He stared at that photo for maybe 5 seconds, and Sarah watched his entire face transform. The gentleness remained, but underneath it, something harder crystallized. Something that had been forged in Army Rangers and tempered by his sister's death. When Marcus looked back at Sarah, his voice was different. Still gentle, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Who did this to you? My ex-fiancé. He's coming here. Today. Maybe in a few hours. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I've been running for 18 months. But he found me. He always finds me. Marcus stood slowly, helped Sarah to her feet. Around them, the diner was returning to normal. Conversations resuming, newspapers rattling, the ordinary rhythm of a Thursday morning. But Marcus and Sarah existed in a bubble of shared understanding, a moment of truth that couldn't be taken back. What's his name? David Morrison. Dr. David Morrison. He's a heart surgeon. He has money, connections. The police, Sarah's voice broke. They always believe him. Always. Marcus nodded once, sharp and decisive. Not anymore, they don't. He pulled out his phone, thumb moving over the screen with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched him compose a text message, short and urgent. She couldn't see the words, but she could see the weight he put behind each letter. When Marcus hit send, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 18 months. Hope. Terrifying, fragile, desperate hope. What did you just do? Marcus looked at her, and for the first time since she'd shown him that photo, he smiled. It wasn't a gentle smile. It was the kind of smile that made promises. The kind that meant business. I called my brothers. Within 30 minutes, the parking lot of Rosie's diner began to fill with the deep rumble of Harley-Davidson engines. One by one, members of the Iron Wolves MC arrived, each bike pulling in with mechanical precision. This wasn't a casual ride or a coffee meetup. This was a response to a distress call, and every member understood the gravity. Tommy Ghost Martinez arrived first. 45 years old, former Army medic, now worked as an EMT for Millfield Fire Department. He'd earned his road name by being able to appear and disappear without anyone noticing, a skill that proved invaluable in both combat and domestic situations. Ghost had a medical bag that never left his bike and hands steady enough to stitch wounds or deliver babies in the back of ambulances. Next came Linda Iron Chen, no relation to Sarah, despite the shared last name. 51 years old, family law attorney who'd given up corporate practice to represent domestic violence survivors. She'd taken a 20% pay cut to join a firm that specialized in pro bono cases, but Linda measured success differently now. Success was restraining orders that stuck. Success was custody battles won by the right parent. Success was women walking free from men who thought they owned them. Carlos Tiny Gutierrez arrived on a bike that looked comically small beneath his 6'8" frame. Former NFL lineman until a knee injury ended his career at 26. Now he ran a youth center on the south side of town, teaching kids that strength meant protecting people smaller than yourself, not hurting them. Carlos had hands the size of dinner plates and the gentlest voice you've ever heard. When he spoke to children, they listened. When he spoke to grown men who hurt children, they listened even harder. The core group assembled in the diner's back booth, but they weren't the only ones who responded. Outside, 8 more bikes arrived in the next 20 minutes. Word traveled fast in the Iron Wolves network, and when Marcus sent that particular code domestic situation, immediate response. Required people dropped everything. Sarah watched through the window as leather-clad figures dismounted their bikes and gathered in the parking lot. To anyone else, it might have looked threatening. A gang of bikers converging on a small-town diner. But Sarah saw something different. She saw purpose, organization, people who'd responded to a stranger's crisis because their president had asked them to. Marcus slid into the booth across from Linda, his voice low and urgent. Pregnant waitress, 6 months along. Ex-fiancé is a surgeon with money and connections. Been stalking her for 18 months across multiple states. He's en route, probably arriving today. Look at this. He showed Linda the photos Sarah had shared. Linda's expression went cold, professional. The look of someone who'd seen every variation of human cruelty the courts had to offer. Medical professional, Linda observed. Knows exactly how to hurt someone without leaving marks that show. Except he got careless, or he wanted her to remember what he could do. Ghost leaned forward. Where's she at now? Working. Trying to act normal. Scared out of her mind. Medical care? Ghost asked. She need to be checked out? 6 months pregnant. This level of stress. I'll ask her, Marcus said. But first we need a plan. This isn't just about today. If we handle this wrong, he'll come back with lawyers and police and make her life hell legally. This was where Iron Chen earned her keep. Linda pulled out a tablet, fingers flying over the screen as she accessed legal databases, court records, professional licensing boards. David Morrison, cardiac surgeon, University Hospital, Denver. Linda's voice was clipped, efficient. Clean record professionally. No malpractice suits, no disciplinary actions. Either he's very good at his job or very good at covering his tracks. She dug deeper, pulling up civil court records, divorce proceedings, property transfers. Here we go. Jennifer Lynn Morrison. Divorce. From David Morrison 14 months ago. Restraining order filed, then withdrawn voluntarily. Settlement sealed. Moved to California 2 months after the divorce was finalized. The pattern was familiar and ugly. David Morrison had a type, and he had a method. Find someone vulnerable, someone isolated, someone who needed him. Control them, hurt them, and when they tried to leave, use money and legal pressure to destroy them. Sarah's not the first, Linda concluded. And if we don't stop this, she won't be the last. Tiny spoke for the first time, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. What do you need from us? Marcus looked around the booth, at faces that had seen combat in courtrooms and emergency rooms. People who'd chosen to spend their Thursday morning helping a stranger instead of living their own lives. Documentation, he said finally. Pictures, witnesses, statements. If this goes legal, we need evidence. And protection. We need to make sure Sarah and her baby are safe, while Linda works the legal angle. And if the legal angle doesn't work? Ghost asked quietly. Marcus met his eyes, and the answer was there without words. The Iron Wolves weren't vigilantes, but they weren't pacifists either. They believed in the law, but they believed in justice more. And sometimes justice required backup plans that couldn't be discussed in public. Linda closed her tablet, stood up from the booth. Let me go talk to Sarah. Attorney-client privilege kicks in the moment she agrees to representation, which gives us some protection. Plus, I need to hear her story firsthand. Be gentle, Marcus said. She's been through hell. Linda's expression softened just slightly. I've been doing this for 12 years, Marcus. I know how to talk to survivors. As Linda walked toward the counter where Sarah was refilling coffee pots with shaking hands, the other members of the Iron Wolves made their own preparations. Ghost retrieved his medical bag from his bike. Tiny positioned himself by the window where he could watch the street. Marcus pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. One to the Millfield Police Department to report a potential domestic violence situation, one to the sheriff's office for backup jurisdiction, and one to a contact at the state patrol who specialized in stalking cases. The net was closing around Dr. David Morrison before he'd even arrived in town. But Marcus had learned from his sister's death that preparation and good intentions weren't always enough. Sometimes evil was smarter, better funded, more patient than the people trying to stop it. Sometimes you needed to be ready for war. In the diner's office, a cramped space behind the kitchen that smelled of old coffee and receipt paper, Sarah sat across from Linda Chen and told her story. All of it, the parts she'd never spoken aloud, the memories she'd tried to bury, the 18 months of running that had led her to this moment. I met David at University Hospital, Sarah began, her voice steady but quiet. I was a trauma nurse in the cardiac wing. He was the new attending surgeon, youngest department head in the hospital's history. Brilliant, charming, everything every nurse hoped to catch the attention of. Linda listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad, her face neutral and professional. She'd heard variations of this story dozens of times, but she never let that show. Every woman's experience was unique, sacred, deserving of complete attention. The first 6 months were perfect. Flowers, expensive dinners, trips to medical conferences in places I'd never seen. He made me feel special, chosen, like I was the most important person in his world. Sarah's hand moved to her belly, protective instinct already so strong at 6 months. The control started small. Comments about my uniforms, suggestions about which shifts I should work. He didn't like me working the night shift because there were too many male doctors around. Said he was just looking out for me, protecting his investment. Investment, Linda repeated, making a note. That's how he talked about me. His investment in our future. His project. He was going to make me into the perfect surgeon's wife. Private practice, country club, charity boards, the whole package. The first time David hit her was 8 months into the relationship. Sarah had been scheduled for overtime on a Saturday when David had planned a dinner with his department chief. She'd explained that she couldn't get coverage, that the overtime pay was important for her student loans. David had listened calmly, nodded understandingly, then backhanded her across the face hard enough to split her lip. He cried afterward. Sarah continued, her voice mechanical now, distant. Said he was under so much stress with the new position. Said he'd never done anything like that before. Begged me to forgive him. Linda knew the script. Every abuser used the same playbook, with minor variations based on intelligence and creativity. David Morrison was clearly intelligent. That made him more dangerous, not less. The second time was a month later. I'd agreed to cover someone else's shift, but I forgot to tell David. He came to pick me up for dinner, and I wasn't there. When I got home at midnight, he was waiting. That beating had been calculated, methodical. David was a surgeon. He knew anatomy, knew how to cause maximum pain with minimal visible damage. Ribs that would heal crooked. Kidneys bruised but not ruptured. Internal injuries that wouldn't show up on x-rays but would hurt for weeks. That's when he started explaining the rules. Written rules. Typed up like a surgical protocol. When I could work, where I could go, who I could talk to, how I should dress, what I should eat, when I should sleep. He called it our relationship contract. The engagement had come 6 months later, a 5-carat diamond and a proposal in front of both their families. Sarah had said yes because saying no wasn't an option. By then, David controlled her finances, her housing, her transportation. She lived in his condo, drove his car, had access to money only through credit cards he monitored. The wedding planning was when it got really bad. David had opinions about everything. The dress, the flowers, the guest list. When I suggested inviting my college roommate, he said she was a bad influence. When I wanted my brother to walk me down the aisle, David said it would send the wrong message about male authority in marriage. 3 months before the wedding, Sarah had found the courage to tell her brother Mark about the abuse. Mark was a police officer in Denver, someone she thought would know how to handle the situation. He'd offered to help her leave, offered his spare bedroom and legal assistance. David found out about the conversation within 24 hours. Sarah never learned how, but David had connections everywhere. Police, lawyers, hospital administration, city government. When you saved the lives of powerful people, they owed you favors. Mark got transferred. Suddenly, overnight, from Denver PD to a small department 4 hours away. His captain said it was budget-related, but Mark knew better. David had made a phone call. That's when Sarah understood that running wouldn't be simple. David wasn't just wealthy. He was connected. He'd spent years building a network of people who owed him their lives or their careers. Judges whose children he'd operated on. Police chiefs whose wives he'd saved from heart attacks. Politicians whose fathers he'd pulled back from the edge of death. The pregnancy had been unplanned, unwanted by David, who'd made his feelings clear with the worst beating of their relationship. Sarah had been 4 months along before she found the courage to run. Using money she'd slowly siphoned from household expenses over 6 months. I've been moving every 4 to 6 months for 18 months. Always east, always smaller towns. thought I could disappear completely. But David's persistent, patient. He enjoys the hunt. Linda closed her legal pad, leaned forward slightly. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Do you want to fight this, or do you want to keep running? I can't keep running, Sarah said simply. Not with a baby coming. I need to settle somewhere. Get prenatal care, prepare for delivery. I can't do that if I'm always looking over my shoulder. Fighting means exposure. It means court proceedings, testimony, public records. David will fight back with everything he has. And if I keep running, he'll find me anyway. Eventually. And next time, I might have a baby with me. Linda nodded, opened her briefcase, pulled out a standard attorney-client representation agreement. Then let's fight. As Sarah signed the paperwork that would make Linda her official legal representative, neither woman noticed the black BMW sedan that had just pulled into the diner's parking lot. Dr. David Morrison had arrived 3 hours earlier than expected, and he wasn't alone. David Morrison stepped out of his BMW like he was arriving at a country club, perfectly pressed khakis, polo shirt, loafers that probably cost more than most people made in a month. 36 years old, 6 feet tall, the kind of handsome that made nurses blush and patients trust him with their lives. Clean-shaven, perfect hair, the smile that had charmed its way through medical school and surgical residencies. But Marcus Rodriguez had seen that kind of handsome before, the kind that hid monsters. With David came 2 other men. One was clearly private security, probably ex-military, the type who charged $500 a day to intimidate people legally. The other wore a suit despite the heat, carried a briefcase, had the pale complexion of someone who spent his life in offices and courtrooms. Lawyer. Marcus watched through the diner window as the 3 men approached the entrance. David moved with confidence, like he owned whatever space he entered. The security guy moved like he was looking for threats. The lawyer moved like he was already calculating billable hours. Linda. Marcus called quietly toward the office. Linda appeared instantly, took one look through the window, and her expression shifted into full combat mode. Is that him? Has to be. Sarah, stay in the office. Don't come out until we tell you. Sarah's face had gone pale when she saw the BMW. Now she nodded frantically, backed deeper into the office, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her phone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The diner's bell chimed as David and his companions entered. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. Conversations stopped. The Iron Wolves members scattered throughout the diner suddenly became more alert, more visible. Tiny stood up from his booth, all 6 feet 8 inches of him, and adjusted his jacket so his club patches were clearly visible. David paused just inside the door, scanning the room. His eyes found Marcus immediately, cataloged the leather vest and tattoos, dismissed him as irrelevant. Found Linda next, spent longer assessing her, recognizing another predator in different clothing. Finally, his gaze moved to the office door, where he could just make out Sarah's silhouette through the frosted glass. Excuse me. David approached the counter, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I'm looking for Sarah Chen. I believe she works here. Rosie herself appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. 73 years old, owner-operator for 45 years, had seen every kind of trouble walk through her doors. Who's asking? Rosie's voice was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. Dr. David Morrison. Sarah is my fiancée. I've been looking for her. The lie came so smoothly, so confidently, that for a moment it almost sounded true. But Marcus caught the micro-expression that flickered across Sarah's face through the office window. Terror. Pure. Animal terror. Linda stepped forward, professional and calm. Dr. Morrison, I'm Linda Chen, attorney at law. Miss Sarah Chen is my client. Any communication regarding her needs to go through me. David's perfect smile never wavered, but his eyes sharpened. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd come prepared for a scared, isolated woman. not legal representation, and a diner full of bikers who were very obviously not random customers. I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding, David said smoothly. Sarah is pregnant with my child. She's been having some emotional difficulties. Postpartum depression starting early. Her family is very concerned about her mental state. The gaslighting started immediately, public narrative control, establishing Sarah as unstable before she could tell her own story. Sarah is 7 months pregnant, Linda replied calmly. Postpartum depression occurs after delivery, not before. I think you mean prenatal anxiety, which is common in women experiencing domestic violence. David's smile flickered just for a second. Linda had just called him out on his medical terminology in front of witnesses. For a man whose ego was built on being the smartest person in every room, it was a direct challenge. I'm sorry, but who are you exactly? Are you even licensed to practice in Colorado? Linda pulled out her bar card, held it up so everyone could see. Licensed in Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah, specializing in family law and domestic violence cases. Miss Chen is under my legal protection. The security guard stepped closer to David, a subtle show of force. The lawyer opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder thick with documents. Dr. Morrison has legal documents establishing his parental rights, the lawyer announced. Custody claims, financial responsibility, medical, decision-making authority. Interesting, Linda replied. Because Miss Chen was never married to Dr. Morrison, there's no father listed on any medical records. And Colorado law requires voluntary acknowledgement of paternity or court-ordered DNA testing to establish parental rights. Marcus watched the exchange like a tennis match, but he was also watching David. The mask was holding, but cracks were starting to show. A tightening around the eyes, hands clenching and unclenching, the body language of someone whose control was slipping. And that's when David made his first mistake. I don't know what lies Sarah has been telling you people, but she's not well. She's been unstable since the pregnancy began. Paranoid, delusional. She needs medical care, psychiatric evaluation. From you? Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice carrying 20 years of military authority. You're going to provide medical care to your ex-fiancée who ran 18 months ago? David turned toward Marcus, and for just a moment, the mask slipped completely. The smile disappeared. The eyes went cold, calculating, predatory. This is a family matter. It doesn't concern you. Funny thing about family matters. Tiny rumbled from across the diner, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. They have a way of concerning everyone when they involve hurting pregnant women. More Iron Wolves members became visible around the diner. Ghost at the coffee station. 2 more at the counter. Another by the jukebox. Not threatening, just present. Witnessing. David's security guard stepped forward again, but Tiny didn't move. Just stood there, letting his presence speak for itself. The guard was probably skilled, probably dangerous, but Tiny had 4 inches and 60 pounds on him, plus backup. I think, Linda said into the tension, Dr. Morrison should leave now. Miss Chen has made it clear she doesn't want contact. Continuing to pursue her constitutes stalking under Colorado law. I'm not stalking anyone, David snapped. And there it was, the first crack in the civilized veneer. I'm trying to protect my child from an unstable mother who's associating with criminals. Criminals? Marcus asked mildly. We're a motorcycle club. Registered with the state, pay our taxes, contribute to local charities. What crime exactly do you think we've committed? David's lawyer touched his arm, a warning to dial it back. But David was used to being the authority, used to intimidating people with his credentials and his connections. The presence of organized opposition was throwing him off script. You're not taking my child, David said, and this time, his voice carried a threat that everyone in the diner could hear. Sarah can run wherever she wants, but that baby is mine. I have rights. Rights that end, Linda said firmly, when you use them to terrorize the mother. That's when Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. The office door opened, and she stepped out. 6 months pregnant, barely showing yet, but carrying herself with new purpose. She walked straight to David, stopped about 6 feet away, just out of his reach. "Hello, David." Her voice was steady, clear, audible to everyone in the diner. David's expression softened instantly, the mask sliding back into place. "Sarah, sweetheart, we've been so worried about you. Come home. Let me take care of you and our baby." "No." One word. Simple, direct, final. "Sarah, you're not thinking clearly. The pregnancy hormones. The stress you've been under. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 2 years." Sarah interrupted. "I remember every time you hit me, every rule you made me follow, every threat you used to control me. I never show them the photos, Linda." Linda pulled out her tablet, began displaying the photos Sarah had taken of her injuries. The bruises, the belt marks, the documented evidence of systematic abuse. She held the tablet up so the entire diner could see. The silence was complete. Even David's security guard looked uncomfortable. "Those photos are fake," David said quickly. "Digitally manipulated." "Sarah's been unstable, medical records," Linda announced, pulling out another folder. "Emergency room visits. X-rays showing healed fractures consistent with abuse. Therapy records documenting domestic violence." David's perfect composure finally cracked completely. "You lying bitch," he snarled at Sarah, lunging forward. He never made it. Marcus and Tiny moved simultaneously, intercepting David before he could reach Sarah. No violence, no escalation, just two very large men creating an insurmountable barrier. "That's assault," Linda announced calmly. "Attempted assault on a pregnant woman, in front of multiple witnesses." David's security guard reached inside his jacket, but stopped when he realized he was outnumbered 8-1 by people who weren't intimidated by whatever weapon he might be carrying. "You're all making a huge mistake," David's lawyer said, trying to regain control of the situation. "Dr. Morrison is a respected surgeon with connections throughout the state. You don't want to make an enemy of him." That's when the sirens began. 3 police cars pulled into the parking lot, followed by a sheriff's deputy and a state patrol unit. Marcus had made those calls 20 minutes ago, and Colorado law enforcement took domestic violence calls seriously. Officer Martinez stepped through the diner's door, assessed the situation with practiced eyes, saw the bikers, the security guard, the lawyer, and the pregnant woman standing in the middle of it all. "Someone called in a domestic violence situation?" Linda stepped forward immediately. "Officer Martinez, I'm Linda Chen, attorney for Miss Sarah Chen. My client has been stalked across multiple states by Dr. David Morrison. She has documented evidence of previous abuse and feels threatened by his presence." Officer Martinez turned to David. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification." David handed over his driver's license, along with his medical credentials, subtly establishing his authority and respectability. "Dr. Morrison, what's your relationship to Miss Chen?" "She's the mother of my unborn child. She's been experiencing some mental health difficulties and disappeared from Denver 18 months ago. I've been trying to locate her to ensure she receives proper prenatal care." Textbook manipulation. Concerned father, unstable mother. Medical authority vouching for the narrative. But Sarah was ready. "Officer, I'd like to file charges for stalking, harassment, and attempted assault. I have documentation of Dr. Morrison's abuse, medical records, and photographic evidence." She handed Officer Martinez a folder that Linda had prepared, everything organized and professional. David's lawyer stepped forward. "Officer, my client has never been charged with any crime. He's a respected surgeon trying to ensure his child's welfare. This appears to be an attempt to alienate him from his parental rights using false accusations." Officer Martinez looked at the folder, looked at David, looked at Sarah. Then he noticed something that everyone else had missed. Sarah was recording. Her phone was in her hand, camera pointing toward David, recording everything, including David's outburst, his threat, his attempt to lunge at her. "Ma'am, how long have you been recording?" "Since Dr. Morrison entered the diner," Sarah said clearly. "I wanted to document any threatening behavior. Officer Martinez held out his hand. May I see the recording? Sarah played back the last 10 minutes. David's lies about postpartum depression, his claims about Sarah's mental health, his dismissal of the abuse evidence, and most importantly, his snarled threat and aggressive movement toward a pregnant woman. When the recording finished, Officer Martinez's demeanor had shifted. Dr. Morrison, I'm going to need you to step outside with me. What happened next would determine not just Sarah's immediate safety, but whether David Morrison's pattern of abuse would finally face consequences, or whether money and connections would protect him one more time. The real battle was just beginning. What Officer Martinez saw on Sarah's video changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. Because while the recording clearly showed David's threatening behavior, it also showed something else. A coordinated response by multiple parties that looked suspiciously like witness tampering and intimidation. David's lawyer seized on this immediately. Officer Martinez, I'd like to point out that my client has been surrounded by an organized group of intimidating individuals since entering this establishment. The presence of multiple motorcycle club members, the immediate appearance of legal representation, the coordinated recording of this interaction. This has the hallmarks of an orchestrated setup. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The lawyer wasn't wrong. From the outside, this could look like entrapment, like they'd known David was coming and prepared an ambush. But then Officer Martinez did something unexpected. He smiled. Actually, counselor, I think you'll find this is just good police work. He pulled out his own recording device, a digital recorder that had been running since he entered the diner. You see, I got a call about 20 minutes ago from Marcus Rodriguez here, reporting that a domestic violence survivor was being stalked by her abuser. Mr. Rodriguez provided detailed information about the stalking pattern, the victim's pregnancy, and the expected arrival time of the suspect. He requested police presence to ensure the situation didn't escalate. Officer Martinez looked directly at David. Dr. Morrison, you're under arrest for stalking, harassment, and attempted assault. You have the right to remain silent. David's perfect composure finally shattered completely. This is ridiculous. I'm a surgeon. I save lives. You can't arrest me for trying to see my own child. Sir, you need to calm down, Officer Martinez said firmly. But David was past the point of calculation now, past the point of masks and manipulation. Do you know who I am? Do you know who I know? I have the chief of police on speed dial. I've operated on the mayor's father. You're making a career-ending mistake. And there it was. The real David Morrison. Not the charming surgeon or the concerned father, but the entitled predator who believed his connections made him untouchable. Officer Martinez continued reading Miranda rights, while his backup officers took positions around David. The security guard backed off, hands visible, clearly not interested in escalating a situation with multiple police officers. But David's lawyer wasn't finished. Officer Martinez, my client, is clearly upset. He's been separated from his pregnant fiancée for 18 months, and the emotional stress is affecting his judgment. I'm requesting that he be released to my custody for psychiatric evaluation rather than booking. Denied, Martinez replied. Your client just threatened police officers with political retaliation and demonstrated a pattern of escalating behavior toward a pregnant woman. He's going to the station. As the handcuffs clicked into place, David looked straight at Sarah. This isn't over. You can run. You can hide behind these criminals. You can get all the lawyers you want. But that baby is mine, and I will get what's mine. The threat was clear, specific, and delivered in front of multiple police officers. Any doubt about David's intentions evaporated in that moment. Additional charge, Officer Martinez announced. Criminal threatening. As David was led toward the police car, his lawyer was already on his phone, calling in favors, mobilizing connections. Because men like David Morrison didn't go down easily. They fought back with everything they had. Money, influence, reputation, and the institutional support of people who owed them favors. But for the first time in 18 months, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Safety. Not permanent safety. Not complete safety. but the immediate, physical safety of being surrounded by people who'd chosen to protect her instead of protect her abuser. Marcus approached her carefully, respectfully. "How are you holding up?" "I'm shaking," Sarah admitted, looking down at her hands. "But not from fear. From adrenaline. I never thought anyone would just show up like this." "That's what family does," Marcus said simply. "And your family now." Linda was already on her phone, calling contacts at the district attorney's office, the domestic violence unit, victims' advocacy groups, building a legal fortress around Sarah before David could mount his counterattack. Ghost appeared with his medical bag. "Sarah, I'd like to check your blood pressure. Make sure the stress hasn't affected the baby. I'm a certified EMT. I can do a basic wellness check right here." For the first time in 18 months, Sarah was surrounded by people whose first instinct was to care for her rather than control her. But the celebration was premature. David's lawyer finished his phone call, approached Officer Martinez with a new confidence. "Officer, I've just spoken with District Attorney Harrison. He's personally familiar with Dr. Morrison's reputation and contributions to the community. Pending a psychiatric evaluation, Dr. Morrison will be released on his own recognizance within the hour." The system was already working to protect David Morrison. Money and influence trumping evidence and victim safety, just like Sarah had experienced before, just like she'd been afraid would happen again. Marcus saw the hope drain from Sarah's eyes, saw her shoulders slump with defeat. That's when he made a decision that would change everything. "Officer Martinez," Marcus said, "I'd like to make an additional report." He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a number he hadn't called in 6 months. "I need to speak with Detective Rivera from the Multi-Jurisdictional Domestic Violence Task Force. Tell her Marcus Rodriguez has information about a pattern predator with victims across multiple states." The call that followed would reveal that Sarah wasn't David Morrison's only victim. That Jennifer Lynn Morrison, the ex-wife who'd moved to California, hadn't been as silent as David thought. That she'd been cooperating with a federal investigation into medical professionals who used their positions to abuse vulnerable women. That David Morrison was about to discover that some connections worked both ways. And that sometimes, when you hurt enough people, those people find each other and find their voices together. The brotherhood Sarah had found wasn't just local. It was part of a larger network of survivors, advocates, and protectors who'd been building a case against Dr. David Morrison for over a year. And now they finally had what they needed to bring him down permanently. 6 weeks later, Sarah Chen sat in the waiting room of Millfield Community Hospital, one hand on her rounded belly, the other holding a card that had arrived in the mail that morning. The card was simple, hand-drawn by a child, showing a woman in a nurse's uniform standing next to a motorcycle. For the nurse who was brave, the card read in careful 8-year-old handwriting. From Lily Martinez. Ghost's daughter had drawn the card after her father told her about the day. Brave people helped someone in need. Children understood justice differently than adults. To them, it was simple. Strong people protect weak people. Good people help scared people. Heroes show up when they're needed. Sarah was no longer weak, and she was certainly no longer scared. But she'd never forgotten the feeling of being both. That's why she decided to stay in Millfield after David's conviction. Why she'd taken a job at the community hospital. Why she'd joined the Iron Wolves as an associate member, the first non-rider in the club's history. The prosecution had been swift once Detective Rivera's task force connected the evidence. 5 other women came forward, including Jennifer Morrison, who'd been secretly documenting David's pattern of abuse for months. Medical records from 3 states, testimony from nurses who'd seen David's treatment of female colleagues, financial records showing a pattern of controlling and isolating behavior. David Morrison was convicted on 14 counts, including stalking, domestic violence, witness intimidation, and medical malpractice. His medical license was permanently revoked. He would spend the next 8 to 15 years in prison, and when he was released, he'd be a registered sex offender with no professional credentials and a criminal record that would follow him for life. But the real victory wasn't David's conviction. It was what happened after. The Iron Wolves had formalized their domestic violence intervention program, partnering with Linda's law firm and the county sheriff's department. They'd helped 17 other women in the past 6 weeks, providing everything from safe transportation to legal representation to simple human presence during court proceedings. Sarah had become the program's coordinator, using her medical background to identify abuse victims and connect them with resources. She testified before the state legislature about the unique role community organizations could play in domestic violence prevention. The baby kicked, strong and healthy at 34 weeks. Sarah's doctor said everything looked perfect, that she was in excellent health, that the stress-free environment had been exactly what she and the baby needed. A familiar rumble filled the hospital parking lot as visiting hours began. Sarah smiled, recognizing the sound of Marcus's Harley. He arrived every Tuesday at exactly 3 p.m. for what he called Uncle Duty, bringing flowers and updates from the diner and awkward attempts at baby talk to her belly. Marcus appeared in the waiting room doorway, helmet under his arm, looking profoundly uncomfortable in the hospital setting. "How's my niece doing today?" he asked, settling into the chair beside Sarah. "Nephew," Sarah corrected with a smile. The ultrasound was very clear. Either way, kid's gonna grow up knowing he's got 37 aunts and uncles who ride motorcycles and don't take crap from anybody. Sarah laughed, the sound clear and genuine. 6 months ago, she couldn't have imagined feeling this safe, this supported, this hopeful about the future. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Why did you help me?" "I mean, really? You didn't know me. I was just a waitress who spilled coffee and looked scared. Why did you risk everything?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "Because 18 years ago, my sister, Elena, was a scared waitress who spilled coffee and looked for help in all the wrong places. Because I was young and stupid and thought following rules was more important than saving lives. Because I buried my sister when I could have saved her." He looked at Sarah directly. "You reminded me that second chances aren't just for the people who need saving. They're for the people who failed to save someone the first time." Sarah reached over and took his hand, calloused and scarred and gentle. "She would be proud of who you became. Maybe, but more importantly, you're alive. Your baby's gonna be safe. And David Morrison will never hurt anyone again." The doctor called Sarah's name, and Marcus stood to leave, but she stopped him. "Will you come with me? For the ultrasound? I know it's not traditional for motorcycle club presidents to attend prenatal appointments, but I'd be honored," Marcus said, and he meant it. In the ultrasound room, as they watched Sarah's son move and stretch, on the grainy monitor, the technician asked about the baby's father. "He's not in the picture," Sarah said simply. "But this little guy is going to have the biggest extended family in Colorado." After the appointment, Marcus walked Sarah to her car, a used Honda Civic that ran perfectly thanks to Tiny's mechanical skills. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. The club voted last week. We're establishing a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing nursing degrees. We want to call it the Elena Rodriguez Memorial Fund, and we want you to be the first recipient." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, the good kind that came from being overwhelmed by kindness. "Marcus, I can't. You're not taking charity. You're accepting family support. There's a difference." As Sarah drove home to the apartment above Rosie's diner, she passed the courthouse where David Morrison had been sentenced, past the police station where Officer Martinez still worked domestic violence cases, past the small town, Main Street, where everyone now knew her story and chose to see strength instead of victimhood. She parked behind the diner and climbed the stairs to her apartment, where dinner was waiting on her doorstep, as it had been every night for 6 weeks. Tonight it was Mrs. Patterson's famous casserole with a note that read, "For Sarah and baby Rodriguez," because the entire town had decided that Sarah's child would carry the name of the man who'd saved them both. Inside her apartment, Sarah looked at the photo on her refrigerator. 37 Iron Wolves members standing in formation beside their motorcycles, and in the center, one pregnant woman in scrubs, smiling like she'd finally come home. Below the photo, in her own handwriting, were the words that had become her daily affirmation. You are not alone anymore. That night, as Sarah felt her son moving inside her, she understood something that had taken 18 months of running to learn. Family isn't about blood or genetics or legal documents. Family is about showing up. Family is about people who see you drowning and refuse to swim past. Family is about strangers who become sisters and brothers because they choose courage over comfort. And sometimes, family wears leather and rides loud motorcycles and shows up when the whole world has failed you. Her son would grow up knowing that his mother was brave enough to ask for help and strong enough to rebuild her life. He'd grow up knowing that real strength means protecting people who can't protect themselves. He'd grow up knowing that sometimes the people who look the scariest are the ones with the biggest hearts. And he'd grow up knowing that no matter what happened, he was part of something bigger than himself. Part of a brotherhood that would always answer the call. Part of a family that had started with one desperate photo and a biker who refused to look away. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.